Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. I'm your host as always, Alex, and we've got a busy show ahead of us. And joining me to take us through it, we've got Logan.
Hello, everybody.
Um, it feels like it's been a fair while since our last game, but we had a relatively disappointing loss to Chelsea in terms of the result. But I mean, personally at least, there seemed to be some positives to take from how we played in that first half. How did you see it, Logan?
Yeah, certainly. I think you summed it up already. The first half was really encouraging. I thought that we seemed to cause Chelsea some problems and look like that kind of attacking flair outfit that under Phelan we know he can be. But yeah, sadly it all just didn't seem to click in the second half. And obviously the goals that we conceded were almost gifts from some pretty lackadaisical defending. So yeah, look, positive first half, not so impressive in the second half, but definitely there were some positives that we can take away from that fixture.
Focusing first on the first half, I guess, if we want to look at the positives first. From my point of view, I mean, Mbakani looked really promising up top with his hold-up play and looked really dangerous. And I think there was that passage, I think it was Mason who played that through ball for him, where if he'd had a better first touch, he might have actually been able to put himself into a position to score. It's interesting. I mean, I've seen a bit of criticism for Marshall and people saying they're not too convinced by him, but I actually thought he had a pretty decent first half, and I seem to remember him making a couple of saves. I mean, I don't know how you saw it, but who were the players that stood out for you?
Yeah, just on Marshall, I agree. I think I saw a few people slating him on the back of the two goals that he conceded. On first watch, as I was watching those goals live, I kind of thought that Marshall could be at fault. And then when I saw the replays, and you kind of got to look at the reverse angle and just kind of where Marshall was positioned, they were just two very quality finishes. And there's no keeper in the world that's getting to either of those. So, I couldn't be critical of Marshall at all. I'm with you. I thought Mbakani was very solid. He looked like a bit of a spark in a relatively somewhat average second half. But I thought Mbakani was the standout for mine.
And then in terms of, I mean, we had the discussion in the last podcast about who was going to deputise at right back in Elmo's absence. And I thought Myler, I mean, he didn't look too promising offensively, but I guess all that was really going to be expected of him was that he could do a job defensively. And I thought that he did that, and he certainly didn't seem to be out of place at right back.
No, certainly not. I definitely agree. You know what David Myler is going to offer you. And I think I mentioned that in the last podcast was he will just run and work his socks off for the cause. So, like you said, he will never offer you too much in offense from that position. But, certainly a more than reliable defensive plug. And I thought he did his job well.
And then I guess looking at the negatives out of the game, and I mean you can probably sum most of them up as having occurred in the second half, and you've touched on it already with the defensive errors. Is there something you can pinpoint in that? I mean, without maybe pointing fingers at players, I mean, it just seemed like there was some sort of attitude shift in the second half with the way we played, and it feels like Davies a little bit has dropped off in terms of confidence over the last few weeks. I mean, I don't know if I'm imagining that perhaps, but he and Livermore didn't really seem to click as well in that second half.
No, and I think it might be a case of we kind of began the season with that flair and that kind of optimistic approach that nobody really thought anything was going to happen as far as who we had on paper, and everyone was kind of expecting us to go the first couple of months without a win to our name. And because we came out with such a different approach and really surprised everybody, including the whole City faithful, I think there was a sense of optimism that we kind of were doing, we came out of the blocks flying and it was going to continue to be the case. I think now that a little bit of reality set in with this difficult fixture patch that you mentioned before, I think now we're starting to see Davies kind of go back into his shell, maybe somewhat. And the fact that Livermore is now probably being exposed more so for the fact that he's not a centre half. They definitely did look a little bit more, we did look more frail. And I think that the return of Michael Dawson now will be a welcome one.
Well, I was going to ask you about Dawson, and presumably if he's past fit, he'll go straight back in at centre back alongside Davies against Bournemouth. From Harry Maguire's point of view, how do you see that? I mean, for Maguire as a fit centre back to be sitting on the bench while we play Livermore there must sting a little bit. And if Dawson, even though Dawson is the club captain, even in that case, I mean, for Dawson to go straight back into the side and Maguire not to be given that chance at a start in the league, do you think that Maguire's able to accept that?
It'd be an interesting one. Harry Maguire seems like an absolute professional, and I think probably to add on to it is that I don't know whether there was a concrete bid from Middlesbrough in the off season, but I know that there was certainly a lot of talk about them being interested, and you can't help but wonder whether that would add to the kind of frustrations from Harry Maguire if he was kind of being looked at as perhaps the starting option for some of our rival clubs to find himself on the back. You would kind of wonder, but it must be somewhat unsettling.
Another player who found his place on the bench against Chelsea was Abel Hernandez, top scorer from last season, who lost his place to Mbakani, which, I mean, personally I found a bit surprising. I expected Mbakani to start, but I thought he was going to start in place of Diomande, who, to his credit, actually looked really good in that first half with some of his play. So I felt I should mention that. But from the point of view of Hernandez, do you see that perhaps as just wanting to give him a rest before the break, or there might be an attitude issue, or just a case of changing the team up?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I would suggest that it probably has got a lot to do with the international fixtures. We had obviously the 2 fixture weekends in relatively short succession, and we know that Abel hasn't really always backed up when he's had to travel extreme distances. So look, I would probably suggest that Mike Phelan was heading down that path rather than Hernandez being in a disgruntled state. Yeah. There's been nothing really to suggest that that's the case. But I did read something about Hull improving his contract offer again. So, look, it's it's an interesting one, but I think it is for the case of just keeping him fresh.
And then I guess just to sum things up, who do you see as the 3 best players on the pitch from your point of view?
I think Mason will certainly be if he looked promising in patches. I think Mbakani and Sam Klukas is another one that just continues to kind of prove to us that he's just come along leaps and bounds. He was kind of the dark horse, and yes, he impressed us in the championship, but he really looks at home. And for someone who was probably not to be expected to be playing, particularly in the centre of the park, he's really impressed.
And it's hard to say this without sounding slightly insulting, and I really don't mean it to, but he's one of those players who he does the basics really well, and it's such an underrated thing to be able to do, just to have that ball control, the passing accuracy, the tackling timing, all of those sorts of things. Theoretically, I mean, they're just basic skills, but he does them so well that it just gives him that concrete base to then play his game and really sort of cement that spot in the team as that deep-lying pivot in the midfield. And yeah, as you say, he certainly doesn't look out of place at all in the Premier League, and really didn't disgrace himself against Chelsea again.
Yeah, not at all. I'm really impressed with him, and I think that he's, for the £1 million that Brucey ended up purchasing him for, I think he's an exceptional buy.
Well, talking of Bruce, I mean, there's obviously been a bit of news concerning him in the last day or so over the international break, and we'll start on the pitch before we go to those off-pitch news items. But on the pitch, we had a bit of a mixed bag with our players away on international duty. I mean, we had Marshall, Maloney, Robertson and Snodgrass all in the Scotland squad, and they had a 1-1 draw with Lithuania before going down, I think it was 3-0 to Slovakia. While some of the other players didn't even get on the pitch, I think Hernandez and Myler didn't play many minutes between them. Then on the other side of the coin, I mean, we had Diomande scoring a goal, getting an assist in Norway's qualifier against San Marino, while Mbakani scored 2 goals against Libya. So, looking at that as a sort of total package, how did you sort of assess our players' time away over the break?
Yeah, I was surprised that Maloney was able to snare that Scotland recall, because he hasn't really been given the kind of game time at Hull to kind of impress. But to see him get recalled was could only be a positive thing for us. I don't really read too much into the Scotland fixtures, if I'm honest. Mbakani getting on the score sheet for a double, and also for Diamande to contribute and score his first international goal. That's positive signs, regardless of who the opponents are. For them to be scoring international goals is great for Hull, and they can certainly head into the weekend fixture against Bournemouth relatively optimistic.
We'll move on then to those off-field news items, I suppose. And it was rumoured for a few days and finally confirmed this morning our time and perhaps yesterday English time. I'm not sure how the time difference is all going to work out on that one. But Steve Bruce has been appointed as manager at Aston Villa, which is an interesting one because it sort of reminds me of the controversy at Sunderland where he was appointed and they saw him as a Geordie, as a Newcastle supporter, and there was a lot of consternation on that front. And even more so this time around because of the fact that he had such a successful stint at Birmingham, that perhaps there'll be that sort of controversy with Villa. And it's a really interesting one because Bruce often in his early days at Hull would talk about the fact that Sunderland supporters never really gave him a chance because of those Newcastle links. So I wonder if it's an interesting decision by him to take that chance again to an extent where if it starts to go wrong for him with Villa, those Birmingham links might be dredged up again. What did you make of that appointment for Villa? And firstly, I mean, I guess from Villa's point of view, do you think it's a good appointment? And then also from Bruce's point of view?
Okay, so from Villa's point of view, I think it's an incredible appointment. He regardless of what people say about Steve Bruce, I think that we, from the vantage point of Hull City fans, are more than capable of assessing his championship form. And he's very proven and has done a great job with us repeatedly, particularly getting us out of the championship twice. And I think that with the squad that he inherits at Villa, on paper at least anyway, he's got a lot to work with. Some incredible goal scorers there. And I think that we've probably been critical of Steve Bruce in the sense that he's probably too defensive. I think that the Aston Villa fans at the moment would probably welcome that approach, especially considering if they've got McCormack and who's the other...
Is it Codger?
Yeah, Codger. They're signing with a strike force like that in the championship, provided he can get them to gel. That they've got the makings to really to shake the championship up, and I think Steve Bruce will be the man to do the job there. From his perspective, as you mentioned, it's certainly a risky one given the Birmingham links, but at the same time, we know how big a club Aston Villa are, and I think that given the slump in form and the poor seasons that they've experienced recently, I think if Steve Bruce goes in and starts to kind of find form and register a few wins, I think they'll get right behind him. So I think it's a good appointment both ways, and I think it is certainly a good one for Bruce at this time, and I think it's certainly good for Aston Villa given their stuttering recent times.
And then obviously the third perspective, and the one that's probably the most relevant for us, is from Hull City's point of view. Whether he comes back to Hull and pinches a few players or staff members as he did when he arrived at Hull and then pinched David Myler and El Mohammadi from Sunderland. Was there anyone else? No, it was just those two, I think. Obviously brought in Alex Bruce as a free agent as well, as probably the three players most recognised as Bruce players. There's already been rumours that he's looking to bring in Stephen Clements as his assistant from us, which, I mean, it's a weird scenario where Clements is sort of the assistant manager to the temporary manager that we have. So it could really leave us with very, very bare bones backroom staff. From a player's point of view, who do you reckon would be the most likely to go to Villa, and who would we really not want to be losing, who might want to go?
It's an interesting one, especially after the Abel Hernandez links initially. I think that we can probably put those to bed, as we mentioned, because of McCormack and Codger being there. But you would start to wonder, particularly about the David Myler, perhaps your Harry Maguire, some of those fringe players. that Bruce signed, those players will obviously have very good relationships with him. And we know that Brucey likes to keep a few irons in the fire, as he likes to.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't surprise me at all if some of those fringe players are certainly on his list, particularly the championship kind of grafters, if you will, like your David Milos. If he could convince him to head back to the championship, that would almost guarantee him a starting spot. And if they enjoy their time under Bruce, he would probably be the player that I would say would be most at risk, and perhaps Alex Bruce.
And also perhaps El Mohammadi. I mean, looking at it from the point of view that if we reach the January window and Odebajo's fit again, I mean they might well go for Odebajo as well. But I've heard that, well, in an analysis of the Aston Villa squad, they really seem to be lacking at right back. And while Elmo might not be that keen to take a step back down to the championship, money does talk. He seems the sort who he's getting towards the latter stages of his career. He may well take that starting spot if he has to fight with Odebajo here. He might take the extra money, and he might be keen for that reunion with Bruce. Having followed him to Hull from Sunderland, where that involved a step down to the championship, he may well take that step down with Villa, seeing that as perhaps a bigger club. So he's the one that I sort of wonder. The other one that I saw named, which I thought a bit interesting, was Alan McGregor, and I'm not too sure if that one would really be much of a worry from our point of view, particularly because of David Marshall in the team now. But also, I'm not too sure if McGregor's going to get back to full fitness to be of any relevance for Villa.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't think Alan McGregor, if he were to leave Hull at this stage, would be considering we mentioned, we've harped on about it a lot in previous weeks about just how good Yak has kind of come along, and the improvement that we've seen with him, and he's a very, very stable keeper to have, as whether he starts or is a backup keeper to Marshall, and so we look to kind of be relatively strong in that area. So look, if Alan McGregor were to leave, it wouldn't be kind of the end of the world from a City perspective. But yeah, you're right. His fitness in recent years, for a goalkeeper, he seems to carry a lot of injuries.
Yeah.
And that would be quite concerning considering he's getting on in age.
And then finally, just from Phelan's perspective, I mean, I alluded to it a little bit just before in terms of Clements, but Phelan was really keen to get that contract sorted out over this international break, and still it drags on. Still, there's no word from the club about getting that permanent contract signed. And you've just got to wonder, I mean, if Clements and a few others are allowed to leave to go to Villa, surely that's almost the final straw for Phelan. I mean, if he's reduced to the bare bones in terms of support, perhaps he ends up walking. And then where does that leave us? I mean, we'd essentially have no one to replace him.
Yeah, certainly. It does make you wonder exactly whether was even kind of discussed in the backroom stuff, whether people were kind of waiting to see what happened with Steve Bruce once he left, to see if he would pick up a manager job elsewhere, and whether perhaps, I can't imagine the Allens having that much foresight, but it certainly would have been a concern, to see if Steve Bruce was to pick up a big club like the Aston Villa signing that he's obviously undertaken. What does that mean for us? I think it's anybody's guess, but yeah, the Phelan contract saga dragging on is certainly now. It's just gone beyond a joke, really, and it does make you wonder: is there something else behind the scenes that kind of hasn't really been spoken about?
Yeah. We'll move on to talk on field, and I do wonder, and it sort of links back into this Bournemouth discussion we'll have now. I wonder if they're sort of hoping that over the next few weeks they'll get a better sense of where the club's at as we come into these easier games, where Phelan can perhaps show his managerial capabilities a bit better, as we did. I think probably Swansea's the game that I think of as really... even though we had that great result against Leicester, I feel like the Swansea game was almost the peak of our powers so far, where we've really shown how we can play when we want to be expressive. I mean, we left the goals quite late, but we were passing along the ground really well. We were finding players really well by foot, and then that second goal from Hernandez really kind of encapsulated and symbolised our entire style of play, with those rapid-fire passes really cutting through the Swansea defence.
Yeah, and I think that it's probably not that style of play has escaped us, rather that we've just
Yeah.
had to play differently because of the kind of quality of opposition that we've been up against. And that's no disrespect to Bournemouth, because I think they play an excellent brand of football, and they're going to be certainly difficult to beat regardless.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about that game now, they've had a very impressive record at home. I think they've kept clean sheets in their last 2 games at home. Usually on this podcast, people will note that I try and find a bit of audio from the last time we played the relevant side, so that we can kind of pump ourselves up listening to a goal that we've perhaps scored against them. But the last time we played Bournemouth was back in, I think it was the 2004-2005 season, so more than a decade ago. It was a 4-0 win at Dean Court, and we also got a 1-0 win back at home, so we did the double over them that season. But I suspect for a lot of the City supporters travelling to the ground on Saturday, it'll be their first time at the ground, and it's certainly been a while between drinks. But obviously not much in terms of recent history between the sides to read into form-wise. But how do you see this game? Do you see this as a game we really should be winning, or because of the way that Bournemouth have really come on as a club, it's kind of anyone's game, really?
Well, first and foremost, I actually have quite an affiliation with Bournemouth, because my brother's old flatmate in the UK is a Bournemouth fan and has been for several years. So I think when I met him, they were in League One when Hull were in the Premier League. So the idea of Bournemouth and Hull meeting was kind of a pipe dream. And we were hoping to meet in a cup tie or something like that. And we both kind of said, imagine if they were ever to meet in the Premier League. And lo and behold, it's happened. So shout out to Peter if he's listening. But yeah, look, it's an interesting one. And like you mentioned, because it has been such a long time since we played, it's really hard to kind of have any expectation other than respect Bournemouth for what they've done under Eddie Howe in the last couple of years, and really just looking back at some of the signings that they've picked up. Obviously, Jack Wilshere going there. They are going to be a concerning team, and they're kind of one that I don't think anyone really expected them to stay up last year, and they did it reasonably comfortably. And I think that although we probably consider them a relegation battle team, I think we can't really have an expectation to beat them. I would be happy with a point.
And obviously, I mean, they've got Wilson back from his ACL, and he's already kind of slotted back into that side, which is great to see from a neutral perspective in terms of players recovering from those sorts of injuries. And he's perhaps their most dangerous player for us to watch out for on the weekend. But they've also recruited quite well. I mean, as you've mentioned, with Wilshere coming into the side, and also Jordan Ibe joining from Liverpool in the summer. And they've also signed, I think it's Brad Smith, the Liverpool left back, I think it is, who's a young Aussie, starred in the game against Japan during the week, well, as much as you can star in a 1-1 draw. But I think he's actually only a bench player for them, so it's clearly a signing for the future from the Bournemouth staff. But what have you made of their signings? And you've kind of already touched on their progress under Eddie Howe, but how have you seen their performances both last season and at the start of this season?
Yeah, look, for a stadium that only, I think, seats 11,000, they are a very, very small club, and punch well above their weight, similar to kind of how we are. And for them to be able to go out and capture the names, as you mentioned, with Wilshere and Jordan Ibe, and to have young players like Callum Wilson that is a real star for them, I think it just speaks volumes to kind of just the threat that they pose to everyone. Like they lost to 4-0 to Man City early on, but since then they haven't really taken a step back, and I think it's going to be a very, very difficult game.
And so, from our point of view, how do you see the starting 11? I mean, we've already touched on the fact that Dawson's likely to slot back into the side if fit. Would you perhaps then see a sort of flow-on effect where Livermore will still keep his starting spot, but he might move into midfield, and by moving into midfield, that might cost somebody else a spot? How do you see us lining up?
Yeah, I think that with very, very possible that Livermore will move forward, and I think that would probably mean that Henriksen would make his way to the bench. I would be very surprised if Ryan Mason didn't start. And I certainly expect him to. You can't drop Klukas. So I think the midfield will take care of itself, and I do think that Michael Dawson will come in and start.
So it'd be a very Spurs-heavy midfield in that case, because I think it'd be Mason, Huddleston, and Livermore all in that midfield, which would be a bit interesting to see.
Almost a former Spurs spine up the middle of our team at the moment, which is certainly probably it is a good thing to look back and see that that's the caliber that we've got.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you see any way that Hernandez comes back into the starting team, or do you think perhaps with the international duty where he's travelled so far that we might play him again off the bench? Or I mean, as we've talked about, the fact that he was rested against Chelsea might mean he might actually start this game.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how Phelan does set up, but I would think it's probably more than likely Hernandez will start on the bench. And we'll probably see him around the 50th, 60th minute. I don't think they'll leave it too late for him to come on, and we certainly will see part of him. But if he were to start, it would be a boost for us, but I'd be very surprised.
And then I'll get from you, who do you reckon has the most at stake in this game? I mean, we really fired up Diamande last time with this, where we both said he was probably the one most at stake, and he came out and had a really good first half against Chelsea. So who are we going to fire up this week to have a really good game against Bournemouth? Who's probably got most at stake coming into this game?
I think most at stake is, I still think that Sam Clucas is going to be under pressure in the sense that because he's kind of surprised everybody. I think if he were to have a pretty poor match with the quality of particularly if Livermore moves back into the midfield, I still think he's probably the one at risk. With that being said, I think it's been a couple of weeks since Snodgrass has scored, so maybe we'll put some pressure on him.
I like that one. I mean, it's an interesting point about Clucas because I feel like that's the treatment that Jakupovic got, where when there's a player who's in the 11 but it's not expected that they're going to stay there, even if they're in this brilliant patch of form, you sort of look for a reason to drop them. So it does feel a bit harsh, but yeah, I mean, there'll be a lot of pressure on Clucas to continue that form, but hopefully he can. For me, I'm probably going to say it's Hernandez, even if he comes off the bench. I think first and foremost, his attitude. I really want to see him really positive in his running against Bournemouth and really getting at them, because this is the sort of opposition where I really want to see him performing well. I mean, we mentioned the Swansea game where he got a goal, so he hasn't scored since then. Only the one goal for the season. But I really hope, even if it is off the bench, that he can have a really positive impact on the game and hopefully continue his scoring account for us. So, yeah, I think I'll put the pressure on him in that one. And then just to round things off, I'll get a score prediction from you.
I haven't even thought about this one, but I'm going to say, let's go 2-1 City.
Oh, you've read my mind. I think I'm going to go 2-1 City as well in this one. It's really it's interesting in the sense that, I mean, Chelsea and United are the only teams we haven't scored against. So, contrary to other seasons where we've really struggled for goals, it almost feels like we go into every game able to score a goal. It's just whether we can keep a clean sheet at the other end and hopefully outscore the opposition. So I'll go with 2-1 as well for that one. So thank you so much for coming on, Logan.
Yeah, not a problem. And
thank you everyone for listening in. Before we go, I do want to mention that a bunch of us in Sydney will be trying to get along to Cheers Bar for the game. The Bournemouth Supporters Club in Sydney also goes along to Cheers, and they get between 4, 5, 6 supporters there. So if we can get along and outnumber them and drown them out with a bit of friendly banter, it'd be great to see. So hopefully you can see a few of you out there. I'll post details of that on Twitter and in the group again, probably on the morning of the game. But if you can't make it there, or if you're in another part of Australia, shoot your pictures through on Twitter where you're watching the game, how you're supporting the club, and always sing loud and proud for the Amber and Black. So come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black. We're going higher and higher. There's no turning back, 'cause you're Amber and Black till you die.